Well, welcome to Gladney University. We are coming to you live from Gladney's production studio, affectionately named Studio G, and today's training is all about giving voice to children. My name is Jennifer Lantern. I'm the Vice President of Communications and Education for Gladney. As a staff member of Gladney and an adoptive parent, I am passionate about giving a voice to children, and that is why I'm so excited for today's training. Today's presentation is all about how we as professionals can best advocate for the children that we serve. I like to refer to this as being in the place of most opportunity. This means it's up to each and every one of us to work hard on advocating and fighting for what is in the best interest of children each and every day. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items to go over with you. The first thing is that we are working on getting CLEs for this presentation for our legal friends. So those will be coming soon. You should receive your continuing education units 5 to 7 business days after this training. You'll receive a survey right after this training. It should pop up. Please fill out that form, and that's how we'll get your CEUs to you. For some reason, if that doesn't pop up, you'll receive the same survey in your email tomorrow, and you'll receive an email with additional resources and contact information from the presenters from today. So be on the lookout for that additional resource list. That's going to be great for you guys. If you have a question or a comment, please put that in the chat and we will address this for you as soon as we can. I'm so excited to introduce this program to you today. I think you can tell from the sound of my voice that I really believe in this presentation, and I'm so excited about our panel. I'm not going to introduce the whole panel to you right now. I'm going to let Heidi do that, but I would like to introduce you to Heidi Brugel-Cox. She is Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the Gladney Center for Adoption. She's also our Chief Strategy Officer, and she works hard for children every day. She's been working in the field for over 35 years. She is an author and national presenter on ethics as well as adoption law, and she serves as chairman of the board for the National Council for Adoption and is a member of the Academy of Adoption Assisted Reproductive Attorneys. One of my favorite fun facts about about Heidi is that she has a brand new puppy named Kip, and that puppy came from my puppy. And so we have that in common. We share our puppies. So Heidi, welcome to Gladney University, and thank you for presenting today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I am thrilled to be here today. This is such an important topic on how we can give voice to children, regardless of who you represent, what your position is in a case, and in your child protection cases in particular. And I am very happy to be able to introduce my panel today that I've had the opportunity to get to know. So first, I'll let you know I have known Renee Sanchez for many years. I knew her before she had children, and now she has children who are almost grown. So it's been a long time. So Renee has been in private practice. She's worked for a law firm. She's worked on her own. And now she's with the Parker County Attorney's Office representing the state in child protection cases. So fun facts about Renee, she was an ad litem of the year for CASA. So she's very invested in children and children's rights. But she also was one of the 100 people you should meet before you die in Parker County. Most interesting people, not just me, but most interesting people. So we'll have to figure out at some point in the future what it is that makes her so interesting. But I've loved working with Renee for many years, and she is a huge child advocate. The other person I want to introduce to you is a newer friend, Michelle Cummings, and she has a long and varied history. She started in foster care. So not many people have the opportunity to age out of foster care, have a child as a teenager, and then go to foster care, and then graduate from college, worked for Child Protective Services, and then went back to school, went and got a law degree, and is now representing children in foster care as well as the parents who have children in foster care. So she brings a very different view to our discussion, and one that we don't hear very often. So we are so honored to have both of you here today, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. At the end of the program, as Jennifer said, you will get materials emailed to you. So there's so much information that we don't have time to cover in an hour. So I will leave you hanging with that at the end, and you'll get a list of must-dos if we don't have time to get through some of those today, because I want you to hear their really important information. So I want to start out with I guess I'll start with you, Michelle. So one question, we're all supposed to represent the best interest of the child. And Jennifer raised that at the very beginning. When you represent a party who is not the child, how do you, as a parent's attorney, for instance, represent the best interest of the child?
Well, part of that is getting sufficient services set up for the parents, really talking to them, assessing their needs to make sure that they're in the right type of therapy. If they need substance abuse treatment, they're getting that. Communicating with them, communicating with CPS, the district attorney's office or county attorney's office, just reaching out to everybody. And sometimes it works out really well and things go really well and they work their services and their kids go home, and that's definitely in the best interest. And sometimes it doesn't. And then you have to have a talk with your client about what is in the best interest. And sometimes that's not going home, and try to work out a plan to depend on where the child's at for some sort of long-term plan to where they can maintain some contact and so that's what I try to do, and always just make it very apparent to them that everything that we do is what's in the best interest of their child. And if that's not with them, then let's work together to find something that's doable. So that way they kind of have a say in the process and what happens at the end.
So we talked before this morning, before we started, about what winning might mean. So, we think about, as an attorney, winning for your client is winning everything. So in child protection, you think winning for your birth parent client is their child coming back home to them. But you had a different view of that. That's not always the right thing for the child, and that's not always the right thing for your client. So define winning for us.
Sometimes winning is just parental rights not being terminated, or rights being terminated, but having the option with a adoptive family that's willing to, send letters twice a year or pictures to keep them updated on how their child is doing. We try to get creative with post office boxes or email nowadays because it's free and they can check it and they can send emails back and forth.
So what about what I've heard sometimes is that, or I've actually seen it, where the attorney is running toward one direction, but it seems like their client is not that invested in the case. They're not that invested in wherever their attorney's going. Maybe a better way to say it is the attorney's working harder than the client. Have you had that happen? And what do you do about that?
Yes, I do that all the time. And I have to constantly remind myself to not work harder than my clients, because I'm not getting the child. It's them. And part of that is taking a step back, because winning is kids coming home. But sometimes parents, that's not winning for them because they know that they're not in a position to have their child back home. So it's having those hard conversations with the parents about, what do you want? What are your goals? And because sometimes we can get to a termination earlier on in a case as opposed to it dragging out and child being bounced around the different foster homes.
Very good. So I have a question, and I'll start with you, Renee. How do we change the culture and the reputation of the child protection system, especially in the legal system? We hear so many complaints about the system, but we're parties, we're people in the system. And I feel like I work hard, you guys work hard. We're always trying to do what's best for children. So do you have some thoughts about what we can do to change that view of the system so people don't feel bad about having been part of it?
Definitely so, Heidi. I think a lot of times they view the department as adversarial. Their baby stealers are coming in just to create havoc, and that's not necessarily true. And when we go in, if we explain to them, we are on your side, we're trying to provide the services for you to be the best parent you can be. We're not trying to come in and just take your child. We just want to give you the foundation. And they see us as less adversarial and more of a helper, as a friend, and someone to help parent the way that they should be and give this child the suitable home that it needs. I think that kind of shifts, where everybody's working together as opposed to against each other. And that helps.
So Michelle, you had made a comment about communication, and I heard Renee say communication several times earlier as well.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about the communication among all the parties. In my experience, you get to court and you start communicating with the other side. So you're saying that's probably not the best way to do it in a child protection case.
No, communication. I mean, from the moment I receive notification that I've been appointed, I'm emailing everybody, caseworkers. That way I can, get contact information for my clients so I can reach out to them and then just get to know who they are, because sometimes they're new caseworkers and you need to ask them questions and about what's in an affidavit. So it's really just starting communication from day one and not waiting until the day of the court hearing to have a conversation. And that goes for, I mean, talking to families, you can find placement options. You can just find a wealth of information that can help put this child in a better situation than just put into a foster home.
And so on the communication, Renee, you had made a statement that when you were representing a birth parent, you actually would meet with your client before you ever read the file to know what all the allegations were against that person. So explain that. Why was that? Why did that work for you?
I think for me, it worked best because originally when I started doing this type of work, I would read the affidavit first and you get this preconceived notion of your client. And that's not always right. That's not always fair. And it's harder at that point to put your own biases aside when it's already in your head. So I would not read the affidavit. I would just get a summary from the district attorney or the county attorney, just what kind of case it was. Was it a drug case? Was it a physical abuse case, neglect case, what? And then I would meet the client. I would listen to their story first. They're a human being. They're not what they are on paper. And at that point, I would see the person. Then I would go and read the affidavit to learn what we had to deal with legally. And for me, that helped.
Wow. So coming about putting aside the biases. So when you walk into a client, we all come with our own baggage. We come with triggers. And Michelle, you've said before, because you were in child welfare system yourself, you have different triggers than I might have. And your clients can sometimes trigger you and go back to that trauma you experienced when that you didn't even realize. So you made a comment before we started this one that said, you've got to deal with your own stuff before you deal with your client. And you have to be aware of your stuff. So talk a little bit about that. How does that work for you?
I read the affidavit beforehand. I think I don't know that I could do it without it. I have to know everything. But I think that what Renee said would probably really help a lot, because then you're not going in there already thinking a lot of things about what happened or what the situation was. But for me, I read through it and I try to just pick out legally, what's the department required to show. And then just go through there. There are certain fact patterns that come up that are very similar to my story. And then I have to remind myself, this isn't me. And these aren't my parents. And go in there with that, and then just constantly remind myself that everybody's story is different and every family is different. There are similarities, but, and I have to constantly remind myself that this isn't about me. So.
Yeah, I was listening to this morning to some of the interviews for the new Supreme Court nominee, and they were asking her, how does she approach a case? She said, well, I start with a clean slate. I try to set everything aside and come in with a clean slate view. And my first thought is, but none of us has a clean slate. We all have a history, and just the importance of recognizing whatever your biases are, because we all have them. And if you don't recognize them and acknowledge them, at least to yourself, then you're lying to yourself, and then you're putting your stuff on the client. So where have you seen that, Renee, as you've worked in the private world and in the child protection world? Have you experienced other people or yourself?
I've seen it a lot of times, especially when it comes to, whether you're placing with family or leaving the child in a foster home. The foster home has the white picket fence and they have the trips to Disney World and things like that. Whereas a lot of times these families, they have the single wide trailer, but that doesn't mean that child's any less off. I mean, you go to the home, you see how the child reacts, and you see the love and everything there, but you have to let go sometimes also, because you're like, well, what's going to happen ultimately? Do they need that 5,000 square foot house? Or are they going to be okay in the trailer? And you have to step back and realize that that's not what we do. We place with family when we can, and that's most important, with the love that they provide.
That's a very good point. So you raised the point about seeing where they live. So this is one of the top 10 in our must-do list, is to go and see where the child lives, where the birth parents live. And so you say, Michelle, that you do that every time. So talk more about that, because I'm not sure that is everyone's practice.
Probably not. And part of it's probably because I didn't have like an office, but even having an office now, I still like to go out to everybody's house, because I think it boils back or goes back to whenever I worked for CPS, and I would be training new workers and they would be like, well, this house is really messy or it's dirty. And I'm like, this is cleaner than my house. Like, because everyone's perception of cleanliness or safety things is different. And at first glance, a basket of dirty laundry may seem messy if you grew up with a housekeeper or a mother that always had the laundry done. And so it's just getting out there to see what CPS is looking at, so I have a better understanding. And a lot of times I'm going out there and I'm like, yeah, I see what CPS sees, and you need to do X, Y, and Z. And it also helps coming from someone for the parent. It helps hearing that from someone that's not CPS.
So you're reinforcing something they've already heard. Yeah.
Exactly.
So you talked about that. Let's go into accountability of clients. So representing birth parents, you've even said that you would go and find resources for them, that you can't just rely on Child Protective Services to come up with their resources or their case manager. So tell me, how are you finding resources for your clients, and when did you decide that was the job of the lawyer?
Networking is how I find most of my resources, just people that I know. As much as I am not a social person, I become a social person to find resources for people, because I know there are a lot more out there. The department's limited because they have contracts, and if it's not a contracted provider, they won't send them there. And so thinking outside the box, because there are a lot of especially substance abuse treatment facilities that have grants and have other money coming in, that they can take someone that's not private pay. And I don't know when I decided that was my job and not the CPS worker's job. And I think it just had to do with having clients that really needed help right away and didn't want to wait till 6 months into the case. And so I just was like, this is what we're doing.
I love that you said that CPS may be limited to the contracts that they have, that they can only refer people and these programs get paid by their contracts under the department, but you can go outside of that and refer them to other private pay options. So thank you for that. And for our audience, if you have other resources in your community, we need to be able to provide those resources to our clients. So as you talk about that, how do you then, what kind of accountability do you put with your client to do some of that, to do the work?
Well, they have to do all the work, because I can't do it for them. And that's what I always tell them. Like, I'll help you find what you need, but you have to go in and do all the things. And sometimes it works out really well, and they get in and they do the things, and they work really hard and they get their kids back, and sometimes they don't. And I'll still try to check in with them and encourage them to start working their services and get the help that they need. You can't force them. It has to be their choice.
So then at what point do you know this is not working? And do you ever say we need to pivot and make a new plan, or the goal might need to change? Do you do that with your client, or do you wait for your client to come to you? Do you wait for child protection to come to you? How do you frame that?
It kind of depends on the case and the client. Some clients I'm able, to, even though if they're not working their services, they're still in communication with me. So I can talk to them like, hey, this, things aren't going so well. What do we do now? Because we're running out of time. And because that's mostly, we get to a point where we don't have time. And then some parents, they are there and then they're just gone. And then you spend the next 9 months just trying to find them.
So if you have a client that you're able to have this conversation with, how do you reframe it as a new win and keep their self-respect, instead of you failed, you didn't comply with all your stuff, and now you're a failure? How do you reframe that from being a failure to being a good parent who can have a new goal for their child?
Well, I definitely don't tell them that they failed, because that would be a definite shutdown for them. A lot of times it's, we're having a slow start. Are there barriers? What's going on in your life that's stopping you from starting something? Especially if a lot of times it is substance abuse and it's treatment. And a lot of times it's they need a job to pay bills, and so they don't want to go to inpatient, but they absolutely need inpatient. So we try to see if we can work out a goal to get them there. And if that's not something that they're interested in, then it's, where's their child at? Is it in a foster home? Is it an adoptive placement, or is it with family? Because if the child's with family, a lot of times it's like, okay, because you're not working your services, your aunt, uncle, grandparents or whoever has a child is willing to keep the child long term, what does this look like?
So then Renee, what I'm hearing her say is you might need to change the service plan.
Correct.
And some of the goals of the service plan, from being employed to being in a rehab facility that may not have been acknowledged at the beginning. So representing the state, how easy is that to do, to change the service plan?
It's fairly easy, and I encourage my caseworkers early on to not focus just on one path. Check in with that client. If you realize they're not doing something, okay, let's find other family. What can we do? And again, that gives the parents more of an incentive to think of other things. They're not going to feel like a failure just because they don't complete a service plan, but we can reframe it so they do feel successful. They still found a forever home for their child, or they found family that's going to take care of that child when they're not capable or willing or ready to do that.
So another thing I've actually witnessed myself is a birth parent, let's say at a hospital with a drug exposed child, and the CPS workers immediately starting, let's make a plan, let's do foster care, we'll get you your services, and who are your 3 people to put on your list that we might consider for safety plan home. And with the birth mother saying, I don't want to do all of that. I'm done. And the CPS worker pushing back saying, no, this is what the process is. This is our policy. And I've heard you say, wait. There could be a different path. So tell us about that, how you work with your client, which is Child Protective Services workers, to sometimes help change the path.
When I first started with Parker County, I was shocked that our investigators didn't realize that they could place with a licensed placing agency aside from themselves. So now they know when they go in, the mom either didn't know she was pregnant or she has no resources, she didn't have a car seat. So that's usually a key indicator she wasn't prepared. And we don't need to bombard her, ask her what other options she has if she doesn't have them, let her know that, hey, we can bring Gladney in or another agency. You can help choose that family for that baby, and make a plan for your child as a parent. And that's been successful several times. It saves the state money, it saves energy, the birth mom is empowered. That's a good ending for everybody.
I love the idea that it empowers the birth mother to make decisions for her child, because parenting doesn't have to be, I'm raising the child in my home. Making a parenting plan can mean a lot of different things. And so I appreciate that you're seeing that. So now I've heard you say that in some cases, Michelle, that we need to stop visits. So I want to kind of shift over to that, because it is the policy of the department, and the judges go along, it's just, everyone says, as long as they have parental rights, they need to continue to have these visits and build that relationship with the child. And I have seen physically children do poorly and pull back, and it has nothing to do with the foster family setting them up. But I've seen where we need to stop visits. And when I've asked about it, I'm told it's our policy, we will continue visits regardless of the harm that I see and caseworkers see to the child. So tell me about that in your practice, representing the birth parent or the child, especially the child.
I mean, and it's just like what you said, sometimes, especially if the goal is going to be termination, and we know that these children will never go back to their parents, instead of dragging it out for another 6 months, 7 months of visits to where the children are essentially being re-traumatized, or even not even re-traumatized in, what we always see as a negative way. But for some kids, if I'm seeing my parent, it means my parent is doing well and I'm gonna get to go home soon. And if all of us know that's not happening, we're setting this kid up for a lot of disappointment when that termination day comes, because then there will be one visit afterwards and then that's it. And that's traumatic. But then kids that have been, the other side of trauma, the bad with the abuse and everything, going and seeing the parents cause a lot of behavior issues with children and regression. And that's not good and healthy either. And so as much as I hate to say it, because I am a big advocate for reunification, if parents aren't on the right path, and it's a lot more than drug testing, it's all their services, it's lifestyle changes, the visitation needs to stop, because it sets that child up for a lot of pain and more trauma. And one thing that I always see is if visitation gets stopped earlier on, that might motivate that parent to do something more. Because if I'm still seeing my kid, then obviously I'm going to get my child back because it's the same principle and they don't know it's coming.
Wow. So
So-
what I'm hearing you say is that visitation should be about the right of the child and the benefit of the child, not the right of a parent to just have the visits.
Yes,
Wow. Oh, that
absolutely.
yeah, very helpful, very helpful. So that goes along with you about one of our other top 10 things is to be candid with your client. And at one point I'd said, don't lie or tell the truth, but I think we all don't lie and we all try to tell the truth, but being candid is a different way of looking at it. So, so tell me about that from your perspective with the child. Let's start with the child. I know that, I've seen
Yeah, no.
children even living on our campus in our residential facility who are heading to adoption but they were told or they heard that they are here temporarily until they're going home to their birth parent when termination is like next week. So
It's hard to be candid with children because children cry and then it makes us cry. But I think that it's important because it helps build trust with your kids. And for some kids, if you become their ad litem, you may be their ad litem until they're 18. And you have to have a good relationship with them where they trust you. And you can't have a good relationship with trust if you're not being truthful with them. And so I strive to always be truthful with the children that I meet with. And it's sad. The other day I made 4 boys cry because they thought they were gonna be going home in 30 days. And I was like, no. And then they were like, well, like 3 months. No, not 3 months either. Like 6? No, probably closer to 10 or 12. But that's all depends on a lot of things happening. And there was a big cry. But it got the boys thinking, because a couple of them are older, about other family that they had that they might be able to go stay with. And so now we have some other options of family to look at that might be a long-term placement.
So Renee, when you were representing birth parents, how would you, in maintaining empathy, be very candid with them about what's going on and help them work through that?
It was difficult because a lot of times they had a lot more trauma than what met the eye. So you had to be aware of all that. Therapy for them, trying to seek other ways to tell them. Sometimes they wouldn't hear it from me, or I would tell them and it wouldn't sink in. So we would talk to their counselor, we would talk to other people that were involved with their lives, and they would help get that message to them.
So bringing in a counselor, tell me about how that worked. How are your clients, were they seeing counselors? Were they willing to do that?
Many were, some were, or they would start initially, or then they would stop, or they wouldn't start to the very end. Like she said, the 10th month, all of a sudden, the light bulb goes on and they're like, oh, great. I'm like, well, kind of late now. It just depended on the case and on the parent, but it was always being available to them. I would give out my cell number and, I'd get the text message at 10 o'clock at night when they were thinking, it wasn't, 9 to 5, like normal business hours, but to be available to them, that helped a lot.
Well, that is interesting. So you talk about trauma. What I see from so many birth parents is that they have a long history of trauma. They may have been in the child welfare system themselves, and they may have suffered significant abuse as a child, even that they don't realize or remember. And so one of the things I'm going to recommend at the end is that everyone get the book, What Happened to You. Everyone should read it. If you work with child welfare, as an attorney, as a teacher, as a CASA, I don't think anyone needs to be doing this unless they are willing to do some research and read this book. Is a fantastic. It's an easy read. Oprah Winfrey, Bruce Perry. But instead of what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. Because our children, we talk about what happened to you. Well, then these are the adults 15 years later who are in this same cycle now. And then we say, now what's wrong with you? And we should be saying the same thing and asking the same questions. So tell me about that, Michelle. You have had this experience and you've even used it with your clients. So tell me about.
Oh, my trauma?
No, that you talk to them about what happened to you instead of here are all the problems with you. You're a drug addict. You don't have a home. You keep getting in abusive relationships. But you start the conversation differently.
Right. Well, I always ask them about their history. And, part of the substance abuse, it's not just when was the last time you used and what are you using? I always ask them, when did you start using? And then what happened? What was happening around that time frame? And there's always trauma around that. And so it's really getting to the root of their trauma, their substance abuse, and finding the right therapist and treatment for that. But yeah, just asking a lot of questions.
And what about you, Renee? You've said similar things about finding out more about your client instead of the yes, no, here's your history, in black and white, and it's not very attractive.
Correct. What some of our caseworkers have done, which I've been pretty impressed, is especially these kids that are in PMC, permanent managing conservatorship of the department, they have a cycle and they go back through their history and they see, okay, the child breaks down every December. Why? And, that was when something happened. And they're able to, I guess, not stop the breakdowns, but slow them down and be aware, okay, this is coming up. It's charted in his file, make sure you're aware or whatever. And it's helped a lot of our children. And again, it's the reason behind the behavior, not the behavior necessarily itself.
And maybe help prepare the child for that.
Absolutely. And prepare the child for ultimately adoption, which, may not have been an option originally. But if you see the cycle and you see what's going on, it helps tremendously.
So you've talked about children being in permanent managing conservatorship of the states. So I want to shift to that conversation. I see more and more cases where the department changes the goal from termination to permanent managing conservatorship. And what I generally hear is we don't think we can win the case. Well, but that's up to the judge. Whether or not you win a termination is really up to the judge. So I know there are cases where you need to have the state permanent managing conservatorship without a termination, but that means that child will age out of foster care. And we know that is not a good thing. We keep hearing aging out of foster care is a bad thing. We keep trying to shut down those numbers and reduce them. But if we just go to permanent managing conservatorship without a termination, that is the goal. That's the permanency plan. And we know what the statistics are. So tell me, when is it a good thing? When have you used permanent managing conservatorship for good?
I think you always have to look at the best interest of the child. And even in a sibling group, it's not always the best interest of all children to have the same plan. I recently had a case where there were 3 children, 2 younger siblings and an older sibling, and she did not want termination. So we spoke with her, the reasons why, the therapist spoke with her, and we decided it was in her best interest, not to seek termination of her parents' rights. And she spoke with her mother and asked that her mother relinquish us to her younger siblings because they were in an adoption-motivated home, they were stable, and that was one case, and it worked really well.
But you don't try to go, if you think you have a weaker case, do you ever go for permanent managing conservatorship because you just have a weak case?
Not necessarily because we have a weak case.
Yeah.
We balance the risk and we see, what's going on case by case. We've had a couple other cases recently where we didn't terminate parental rights. We gave permanent managing conservatorship to the foster family. And then they were named joint possessory conservators with the bio parents because they had that relationship. If something goes on down the pipeline, they're able to seek their own private termination. But it worked for those 2 cases.
So I love that idea. We had some out of the box ideas, and that was one of them, is that the plan doesn't have to be only with the state. You can do a private placement. Basically, this becomes a private placement
Correct.
with the foster family, or you could seek a private placement. The birth parent could relinquish to someone else and bring someone else into the case, I guess. But one of the things you lose in that I want to make sure that everyone in the audience that is not aware would be aware is that you no longer get subsidy. So if you have a child who they've done a private placement of a 10-year-old, they will lose subsidy. They may not have, Medicaid. So talk about that, or how do we make sure everybody's aware of that?
Several times, like the foster family would actually intervene. So they had their own legal counsel that explained everything to them. Other times we would have, our caseworkers describe the benefits either way and let them seek independent counsel if they chose to. So we did make sure they were fully aware of what they were giving up, and for them, it was worth it to them.
So tell us some examples you've had, Michelle, where permanent managing conservatorship was the best option for your child client. Have you seen that?
For my child clients, probably not so much. Well, no, I take that back. I do have a girl that's 16 right now, and she is kind of sort of reunified with her dad right now. But we're going to try to finalize everything and give custody back, but she wants to stay in care just because of some of the benefits that it offers to her. So, but that, I mean, that's been beneficial because I don't know how the department would feel if he had been terminated and her living with him.
So if they terminated if they terminated the child protection rights and put the child back with the biological family, then you're saying the child would have lost some of the support services they've been receiving. So this way she continues to receive services that she values as a 16-year-old. Wow, how mature is that?
Right.
And then but the dad still gets to maintain a relationship.
Right. Because she lives with him now.
Oh, wow.
It's a very weird, but it works. It works out really well for her and for the family. So
Right. So they're out of the box ideas that you
Yeah.
can do all the time. So another thing I see is people saying, well, we'll address that at the next permanency hearing or the next status review hearing,
No.
which, okay. So at best, that's at least 3 months from now, but usually it's 6 months from now. And so I'm thinking this is a child that 6 months, their time for them. I mean, I used to tell my kids how long it was to get to drive to Lubbock based on how many Rugrats shows that they would have been able to see had we had that option in our car. So time is so different for children. 3-6 months is a long time. So how do you address that representing the child and trying to get things moving quicker, Michelle?
well, everything depends on the case, the kid, and what's needed. If I need something from the department, this week, and they're not responding to me, then I'm going to file a motion and we're going to go have court at the next available setting. I'm not going to wait 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months. And that happens a lot with getting birth certificates, social security cards, things that the teens need to, get in the driver's ed, or even taking a trip, getting permission, because everyone has to agree for them to travel out of state. So it's getting that. And it's like, if no one's going to agree, then we're just going to go to the judge.
So you raise a good point that we know children have a right to all of their documents when they're a teenager, their social security card, their driver's license, passport if they have it, all of these, birth certificate. And so in your materials that you'll receive after this, there's also a document that tells you how to go get all of that. So that's just really important. I think a good resource for anyone who, and it doesn't matter if you're the lawyer, you're the CASA, whoever you are, everybody needs to be seeing this as their job to make sure this child has it. There cannot be too many people doing it. So, so I really appreciate that. So talk about, what does it mean to, you'd said, make sure you investigate everything. Okay, so Michelle, what does that mean, investigate everything?
It means that you don't just take what's in the affidavit as truth, or if you get a call from a caseworker or from another attorney or from a county attorney, or no offense, or from anybody telling you things, don't just take that as being the truth. Go call collaterals. Reach out. I mean, I have all of my parents sign releases of information so I can communicate with their therapist and any other provider that they have. So that way I can be included on getting monthly summaries, because I want to know straight from the source what's being said, because anything else, it's like a game of telephone. And I feel like we've all played telephone. So, and everything gets twisted. And so it's better just to investigate on your own, go out to the homes and check it out. If there are concerns that there's something going on in a home, or that CPS worker's home smells like marijuana, okay, I'm gonna go out to the house and see, because if it does, we're gonna have a really big talk. And if it doesn't, then we're gonna have another talk. But go out and check. Take the time to investigate, take the time to get releases of information so you can speak directly to providers. I think it's very important to have that.
And so when you talk about going out and seeing them, we have an obligation as an attorney representing children to meet with our client before every hearing. Now that we could watch hearings on Zoom or on YouTube, and I'm watching other people's hearings, just trying to learn what's out there. It's fascinating how many people have a phone call or a Zoom call with their child client the morning before the hearing or the night before. It's 5 minutes and judge, everything's fine, everybody's happy. And that shocks me. So what does it mean to you, Michelle, to go out to actually meet with a child client? What does
Well,
that mean?
I mean, for me, I drive to wherever they're at and I spend time with them. We hang out, we talk, we, um, talk over the case and stuff. We talk about school, we talk about things that they enjoy, things that they need, things that they want. If they're having parent-child visits, how are your visits going? If everything's age appropriate, so you have to gauge it based on that. But for some of my PMC kids, it's going and picking them up on their birthday, and we go to the mall and go walk around, get some food. Just seeing them and really talking to them and not just taking, everybody's fine, and you have to dig deeper to really see what's going on with them, because that's just a standard response.
Yeah, especially with those permanent managing conservatorship clients, I see people kind of think, well, the case is technically sort of over. The state's going to keep custody, so we just kind of do a cursory check-in. So I hear you saying no.
Those are some of our most intense cases sometimes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And those are the kids that probably need more contact and more eyes and ears on them because the kids that are in the TMC, if they're in a foster home, they've got foster parents, they have the placing agency caseworker, they have the CPS caseworker, and then whoever else is involved. So there's like a group of people, and then you'll also have CASA and an attorney ad litem. My PMC kids, they have a caseworker and they have me. It drops down significantly. So maintaining that contact with them and really having deep conversations with them, not just a phone call. You doing good? Yeah. Okay. Bye.
Well, and so just taking an example from the one of the most recent cases in the news where the children were, young girls who had been sexually trafficked, and then they're put into a group home, and at least at a minimum, maybe nude photos have been taken of them by other staff, not yet trafficked, okay? So I wonder if there had been a relationship built with the attorney ad litem, and if the attorney had been able to meet with them regularly and had a conversation with a child who's been sexually trafficked is a different conversation from someone who comes from a drug, a young child from a drug home without the sexual thing. So I wonder do you change your conversation depending on what the history of that child is?
Absolutely.
So how do you have the hard conversations about protecting themselves if they've already been sexually trafficked?
I think it depends a lot on the age. Because I have a child client that went through this, and she was telling me some things, and her and I had a conversation about trauma, and we have to be able to recognize just people that may be trying to hurt us as opposed to people that are trying to help us. And she, during our conversation, she actually would like to get some EMDR therapy, which I was super happy about because I felt like she could really benefit from it. So it's just and they're awkward conversations. They're not comfortable. It's not comfortable having conversations about stuff like that with your own children, let alone, a child that's been through a whole lot, but you have to do it. And part of that is just building that relationship with the kids and talking to them again, where they trust you. Because if they trust you, they're going to open up to you. She probably tells me way more than what I really need to know, but I'm glad that she does. I'm glad that she's comfortable enough with me to call me and tell me everything that happens in her life. Because that's how I can help to keep her safe.
Very good. So
Heidi, we have a question. I
Oh.
hate to interrupt, but the question reads, how do you make sure older children attend their hearings? Are they allowed to Zoom in front from school or a group home? As a CASA,
Yes.
I have a hard time with this issue in CASA in Tarrant County.
That is a great question. There is a statute on that. So if you want to start, Madam County Attorney.
They are absolutely able to attend their hearings. They, like you said, they have a statutory right to do that. So I would advise that you contact in Tarrant County, it's going to be the assistant district attorney on the case, and let them know that you want the child there, that she wants to attend. Also contact her ad litem, and they have the obligation to make sure that child's there.
I have actually seen that where the children were not being seen by the judge. And this was back in the Zoom days in the middle of COVID. And I told the mom, the foster mom, who was foster adopt mom, I said, we need to tell the attorney ad litem that these children want to talk to the judge. They want to tell the judge their story because one of the children did not want to be adopted. To your point of the older child wanted to go back and whatever, he wanted to be reunified with a group of older siblings that had already aged out. But the younger children wanted to stay in this home. And so, and then the judge was kind of irritated that we were going to have, that the kids wanted to have a meeting with them and that we weren't just listening to the ad litem. And then once the judge, it took almost 45 minutes or an hour where he Zoomed with them separately in a different room. And he came back on and his entire affect was different. Wow. He said, well, I understand a few things now that I did not know before. So I was very appreciative that he was willing to talk to the children, but I wondered how much quicker this case could have been resolved had the judge had a conversation with the children before. So,
it's difficult because sometimes the child, I mean, you have to realize too, some just want to go to court to skip school and it's hard. And then, you don't
what is wrong with that? Okay.
True. My kids would agree. And other times, some of the topics, some of the discussions, you don't want them to hear all that. And again, you have to be candid with your client, but not at that level, it's not age appropriate. So it's great when the judge is able to meet with the child independently. The child doesn't have to sit through the courtroom.
Right. I don't think the child needs to sit through the courtroom, but the child needs to meet with the judge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one out of the box idea, judges, could be have a Zoom call or have a meeting with the child at the child's convenience instead of at the court's convenience.
We've done that. We've had separate hearings just for the child to talk to the judge, and it was great.
And with Zoom, you can do that now in the evening. You can do it after basketball practice or during lunchtime. I mean, there are just other ways. You don't have to come between 8:30 and 5 o'clock to see a judge. So what have you done with that representing your child clients?
Well, I mean, I guess where I have child clients that I have good judges because they make time outside of the court schedule to meet with the kids, whether that's 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, because they understand and they want to talk to them.
Mm-hmm. So what can a CASA do? The question came from a CASA person. So you said tell the DA or tell the ad litem.
I would tell both because, again, you don't know, the ad litems aren't always as receptive sometimes or they don't want to deal with it. But if you tell the DA, they're going to have to step up.
And when they write their report to the court, I wonder if they would include that into that the child has been asking, the child really needs to see the judge.
I would add that as well.
Yeah. So
we have another question. I'm sorry.
Please.
This is kind of in the same vein as advocacy. I hate to ask this, but if a foster child has an ad litem that is not so active and seems out of touch with the child, is there a way to request a new one?
That's very difficult. I rarely see judges appoint new ad litems. However, again, I would contact the county attorney or the district attorney and let them know this is a concern. I would CC as many people as you could on that email, and eventually it'll get to the judge's attention, and the judge will reprimand that attorney if nothing else. And I'm sure that attorney would probably change their position.
Well, I almost wonder if it depends on the age of the child. Mm-hmm. Just like our adult clients can fire us, child client fire his ad litem, and then the court would probably.
I've actually been fired when you go to candid communication with your client.
Yeah.
It was a teen client, and we went and met with the judge, and the judge said no because I was telling her what she needed to hear. She just didn't want to hear it, and she attempted to fire me.
Well, in your situation, I could see that, but if it's because I don't have contact,
that's true. Yeah,
that's a whole different ball game there, I think.
Yeah, it is hard, and it's hard for the CASA who doesn't have the right to the ability to present evidence and to be there. But I think it's so important. My frustration, the other shocking thing to me, and I asked the attorneys before we started this, with all the Zoom going on, and now everybody's getting their cases heard, being observed by the world on YouTube Live. I'm shocked at how ill-prepared some people are, because I would be mortified, and because you're not watching yourself. I mean, I'm a third person just watching this train wreck, and part of the train wreck has to do with the attorney sitting back, picking his teeth, not really paying attention. It is shocking to me. And so I had asked, surely being on Zoom might make people get more prepared, but that hasn't been the case.
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I very rarely even think that I'm on YouTube. You don't remember.
Oh.
But because I have several, like my legal liaison and other people like that watch it. So I do, remind the judge, hey, are we on YouTube? Of course, my kids think it's great. We have our own YouTube channel, but.
Yeah, well, just so you know out there, if it's a Zoom hearing, you very well may be on candid camera and YouTube. And it's, so, it's just, but it is hard when people do not do what they need to do for children. If you don't want to do this work for children, then don't do it. Okay. You don't do it. So,
Yeah, that's my slogan.
that's your slogan.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I want to cover before we run out of time is about how important judges are. I know we've touched on it a few times, but Renee, I've heard you say so many times that accountability really starts and stops with the judge. So tell us more about that.
Absolutely. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The judges have so much on their plate already. It should fall on the attorney or on the caseworker, but it doesn't. In Parker County especially, we have great judges. There's one in particular where I fear going into court unless I have my I's dotted, my T's crossed, and then some. But that judge also has the ability to bring in everybody up the chain. If she doesn't like an answer from someone down here, she's going to bring in everybody. And you're not going to tell a judge no. And that gets things done, especially with our PMC kids, which we're having a lot of difficulty with right now, getting services for them. They've just been languishing in care, and she's bringing everybody in.
Well, if you've ever sat through the federal hearings that are going on with the litigation against Child Protective Services, Judge Jacks is tough, and I would not want to be in her crosshairs at all. So I appreciate judges that demand accountability.
Absolutely.
So what about you, Michelle? You practice in a number of counties and you've been around all over the state. So have you had the same experience?
Some judges will hold everybody accountable. Doesn't matter if you're, the state's attorney, parent's attorney, ad litem, like this is what needs to happen and this is what's going to happen. And then there are other judges that CPS does no wrong and everything they want they get. And it's more about, I think, erring on the side of caution as opposed to really looking at the facts and what's best for families and reunifying kids or even terminating. I've actually had several cases to where I was shocked that they weren't going to terminate because they had everything they needed there for it. And kids are really young. And to me, if a child's 2-3 years old and in a home that's willing to adopt and the parents have not done anything, then you do a termination, you adopt, because that's permanency. Even PMC to somebody, a fictive kin or a foster parent, like that's still not permanency to me because those parental rights are still intact.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's just taking the easy road or it floors me sometimes, but I have like I said, multiple counties, like some there's accountability and that you're gonna be able to work cases actually really well. And then other ones it's almost not even worth the fight because you're gonna lose at the end of the day.
Oh my goodness. It slays me to hear that it's not worth the fight. That is too much.
It breaks my heart.
Yeah. So judges, you're important. Please hold everyone accountable, including yourself, and take care of these children because they are the most important part of this entire system. They're the reason the system was built, and we seem to keep forgetting that, and we focus on other things that drive us. So I appreciate your sharing that, both of you. I want to go back one more thing about communication. Sometimes I hear a lot of attorneys communicating, but they're really only communicating with the side they agree with. Because it's hard, the point of it's hard to talk to children when you have to give them bad news. It's hard to talk to the attorney that you don't agree with as well and try to keep the conversation. But you might learn something and you might be able to come to some resolution. So can you tell me where you've seen that? Neither one of you, Renee, have you experienced
open communication?
That? Yeah, about communicating with people you don't agree with even.
One thing I do is I have most of my caseworkers send out weekly reports and they CC everybody on there. And so then you know where everybody stands because you get all these responses and replies, but you're able to open that dialogue and you open it early on or you open it weekly. So by the time you get to court or you get to mediation, everyone knows where they fall, everyone knows what they have to do, and everyone knows what's going on.
I appreciate that. Wow. Weekly updates from Child Protective Services caseworker to the attorneys. Michelle, would you
want to move to Parker County?
Hey, come on, we'll take you.
Well, that's the answer. Move to Parker County.
There you go.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like with the communication, even being able to see the other side and ask questions, because I run into this a lot to where I'm like, what are your concerns? And it's like, well, we have concerns. Okay, but what are those? But no one can articulate what those actual safety concerns are for not, putting kids in a certain home or, reunifying or just anything. And that can be very frustrating because like, just communicate, just tell me flat out what your concerns are so we can work on those. Because if I don't know what they are, we
Right.
can't get to the bottom of it and try to fix them.
And that's
So,
holding them accountable too.
yeah.
Or even the
So-
reasons behind the concern. So a lot of times the department's concerned about X, Y, and Z. On the surface, it doesn't look like a big deal. So we get hit. We're like, well, why? This is nothing. Like, no, it is something. Look behind here. Oh, okay, now we get it.
Yeah, tell us more. Tell us more of the story.
Exactly.
So I love that we're ending with that because it's the thing behind the thing that is so often important, which is what trauma is. It is the thing behind the thing. So another book I'm going to recommend to you is The Body Keeps Score. And it's it's a hard read. It is much harder. If you listen to it on audio, it's 16 hours of listening to it. But I read it and listened to it kind of at the same time, so it was helpful. But I'm going to give you a quote out of here that I think is so impactful and speaks to me about our birth parent clients. And it says, if an organism is stuck in survival mode, its energies are focused on fighting off the unseen enemies, which leaves no room for nurture, care, and love. For us humans, it means that as long as the mind is defending itself against the invisible assaults, our closest bonds are threatened, along with our ability to imagine, plan, play, learn, and pay attention to other people's needs. These are the birth parents we're working with, giving them anger management class, sending them just to a rehab, trying to create these safety plans that just touch the surface. That's not going to be enough to get them what they need in order to resolve their trauma and heal them so that they can care for their children. So I encourage you to read this book. It'll be in the email, the materials. Another book I've already told you about is the What Happened to You book. I'm going to just give you a couple of nuggets from that because I love the way it's written. And so what Dr. Perry says is children are especially contagious to the emotions of the people around them. That's the attorney's emotions, the CASA, the foster family, and the biological family, whoever is parenting that child. The child is contagious and they will carry that on to the next generation. And another thing that I love that he says is we feel better with the certainty of misery than with the misery of uncertainty. I just think that's so impactful. That is why people continue to get into those hard relationships time after time after time, because that's the misery of uncertainty is scarier. There's a lot of fear behind that. So these are just a few, good or bad, we are attracted to the familiar. So if the familiar becomes this life of trauma with a foster family, a birth family, whoever it is, that's what that child is going to take on to the next generation. So there are so many nuggets in this book, and it's a much easier read. So if you're going to start with one, I encourage you to start with this one, but definitely read The Body Keeps Score, and we will be emailing out some materials to you and lots more information. So we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to send it back to you, Jennifer, and I appreciate all of you spending time with us today.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Gosh, you ladies are, I don't know, so inspirational to me, and I appreciate your knowledge and your feedback and your candor. I think this was a really important conversation, and I even received some great ideas for upcoming trainings, including how to have hard conversations with children, because I do think that's really important. I also appreciate all the out of the box thinking. So thank you so much for those examples and those details. And we are just so happy that you were all with us today. Thank you so much. And don't forget to check out gladneyuniversity.com for more training information. And if you'd like to be a speaker, there's a speaker form on there. So sign up with us today. Thank you so much. And everyone have a wonderful day and go forth and conquer. Bye.